Good morning. This is the breakout session to discuss ethical investing, tobacco-free finance, and how to stop supporting the tobacco industry. Before I start introductions, I'd like to get the compliance requirement out of the way. I would like to ensure that everyone understands that this conversation should not be regarded as financial, legal, or tax advice. By way of introduction, I am Dina Alessi, a co-founder of Parents Against Vaping E-Cigarettes. I also work in the finance industry as a COO and CFO. From my point of view, this is a topic that comes up more and more frequently in the investment community, and one that I'm excited to discuss. I am even more excited to be joined by our two very knowledgeable guests, Leslie Semmelrich and Rebecca Brown. Leslie, Rebecca, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Sure, and thank you, Dina. I'm Leslie Semmelrich. I'm the president of Green Century Capital Management. We're a mutual fund company based here in Boston, Massachusetts.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Brown. I'm the U.S. Director of Tobacco-Free Portfolios. We're a nonprofit that advocates for the exclusion of tobacco throughout the entire financial service sector.
Thank you both. So what is ESG and ethical investing, and why is it important? Everyone is talking about ESG these days. ESG stands for Environmental, Social, and Corporate Governance. It's basically a generic term used to evaluate corporate behavior. It is a non-financial performance indicator, which includes many different facets around sustainability, ethical, and corporate governance issues. To ensure that there's accountability, many corporations report on ESG matters, and this can range from their reduction in their carbon footprint to the DEI statistics on their board. And ESG tends to be a factor in investment considerations, and more these days is it a factor. Many conflate ethical investing and ESG, and while they may correlate, they do not necessarily mean the same thing. For example, a company may report terrific metrics on ESG matters, yet it may not necessarily mean that they are fully ethically investing. So in layman's terms, a fund that you're investing in may say that they're ESG compliant or have a high level of ESG within their portfolio, yet you may discover that they invest in tobacco. In this country, when there is so much discussion on ethical investing and ESG, should tobacco be part of it? And how are we looking at this? Everyone has a responsibility to look at their own investment portfolio. Are you investing in tobacco? If you're a teacher and you invest in your teacher pension fund, is your state organization prohibiting tobacco investment? You should know. And this is relevant to all of us, whether it's through your pension fund, your 401k plan, your 529 plan. We should know what we're investing in. There are many funds out there that choose and may say, yes, we are an investment company and prohibit tobacco investments, but there are many that don't. And not all investment managers prohibit tobacco investment. So we are here today to understand what tobacco-free investing means, how to get there, and what we can do about it. So let's dive in and talk to our experts. Rebecca, how did the Tobacco-Free Finance Pledge start? What does it mean to be tobacco-free or take the tobacco-free pledge? And what are the implications, good, bad, in doing so?
Hi, so to your point, Dina, a lot of folks don't know that their pension fund or their 401k is investing in tobacco, and that was how our organization actually began. Our CEO was a practicing radiation oncologist who discovered sort of by chance that her compulsory pension was investing in tobacco. And you can imagine that as a practicing radiation oncologist with a vast majority of her patients, she was treating with tobacco-related illnesses, and unfortunately, many passed away. That didn't sit very well. So she made it her life's work to learn everything about tobacco control and also finance, and started engaging her own pension fund in Australia to exclude tobacco from its investment lineup, and was successful in doing so, and then went on to engage with essentially all of the pension funds in Australia. At the time that she started this work, there was less than 1% of the assets in Australia were tobacco-free, and now over 85% of the assets in the pensions boast a tobacco-free mandate. In terms of what does it mean to take the tobacco-free finance pledge, so we engage with asset managers, banks, insurers, pension funds, endowments, and encourage them to exclude tobacco from insuring, lending, and investing with tobacco companies. So as an individual, what you could do is engage with your own 401k or pension provider in terms of what it means for the institutions we're engaging with. They're making a good faith effort to exclude tobacco from their lines of business and go on the journey to that exclusion. Now, we understand you can't just flip a switch necessarily and unwind all lines of business, but the expectation is that over time, there's a plan to stop your lines of business with tobacco. So the initiative was founded in 2018 at the UN. It was sponsored by Malcolm Turnbull, who is then the Prime Minister of Australia, and Emmanuel Macron, President of France. And since then, we have over 185 signatories globally, representing over $15 trillion in assets.
Wow. Wow. Leslie, I don't know if you have anything to add to what Rebecca was saying. But if not, we can, you're muted.
Thank you for that too. No, I was just going to say the Tobacco Pledge is a great vehicle, and Green Century is happy to be a supporter of it. I think it's going to make a huge difference in this fight.
So Leslie, it sounds like this pledge is along the lines of, as they say, doing well by doing good philosophy. Can you please elaborate on how tobacco-free finance can be beneficial from impact and also from a performance perspective?
Sure. At Green Century, we do believe that every investment has an impact, and more importantly, every investor can make an impact. And so there are a number of ways to invest tobacco-free, or reasons to invest tobacco-free. And the first is moral or ethical, which we've already started to touch upon, and the whole theme of this conference. You care about vaping and tobacco addiction enough to spend your time being a volunteer and working on these issues in your schools and communities and homes. And so it's a natural extension that you would include those concerns in your investments. The second is that being part of a tobacco-free movement, you can help further weaken the tobacco industry's political power. You can see from past coordinated investment campaigns how it plays out. So it made a huge difference in ending apartheid in South Africa, and has also made a very large impact in the fossil fuel-free divestment movement that has really changed the conversation at the political and investment levels around investing in coal, oil, and gas. And I really believe that the tobacco-free investing movement can have the same kind of powerful impact. It will draw attention to vaping and help more people understand that this is an insidious problem. We haven't actually won the tobacco fight against big tobacco. It will help take away the social license that these companies have, so they can't keep pretending that they're good neighbors and winning the favor of our elected officials. And then it will help chip away at the industry's political clout, which hopefully will advance more laws and regulations. And then lastly, it may offer financial benefits by helping keep your investments out of a really controversial industry that's being targeted by activists. And the company may be may be subjected to more expensive lawsuits. You're also going to avoid the possibility of holding a company that makes a product that might be restricted further. And overall, I think Rebecca will speak to some statistics maybe about all of this.
Yeah, those statistics, I know, Rebecca, when we chatted earlier this week, I was kind of amazed and blown away by some of the statistics, and, I didn't know. So, please share that. Sure.
So, tobacco's been around for a long, long time. And to Leslie's point, the long-term trends for this industry are not great. There's increasing, activist pressure, litigation risk, reputational risk, and where it fits in with ESG is, in finance, there's been this really sort of seismic shift over the past 5-6 years in the States, where, you know, the idea of using ESG factors in terms of investment process is coming to the forefront. And tobacco does not fit at all into this sort of framework. As an example, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which are one of the frameworks that are often pointed to by investment managers and allocators, 14 of those 17 goals are negatively impacted by tobacco. In terms of performance, the dividend was oftentimes the thing that investors would point to. However, on a total return basis, which includes the contemplation of the reinvestment of dividends, is woefully behind, as an example, the S&P over the 5 years, 5-year basis.
That's amazing, because I think the perception out there is that, you know, they're really high growth. The tobacco industry is a high growth company, but it sounds like you have to scratch beneath the surface and look at the numbers to really understand that. So that's really important. So now that we know what tobacco-free investment is, and we have some data on performance metrics, as an individual investor, what can we do about it? What are the steps we can take to get a tobacco-free portfolio? Are there tools and resources available? Leslie, can you talk about some of the tobacco-free offerings that you're aware of and the resources to get to that goal?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to break it down to 3 steps. So I like doing things in 3s. So the first is to find out if your current investments hold tobacco. So you find out if your mutual funds, your IRA, your retirement plans, your pensions. If you invest yourself, for yourself, you can call or email your mutual fund company. You could read the prospectus, which is quite long, but it would include an exclusionary language around tobacco if it's there. Or you could look it up in a tool provided by an organization called As You Sow. And we'll give you, I think, information on the resources at the end. It'll pop up. If you work with a financial advisor or use a public pension fund, you can contact them and ask them to tell you. Most of the investments I have mentioned, and just most investments still, unfortunately, do include tobacco. So unless you specifically ask for that or search for that in your investments, don't be discouraged or feel badly or anything like that. Just know that it's very commonplace. And just move on to step number 2. And step number 2 is to identify the options that you have to invest tobacco free. At Green Century, we invest and help our investors invest tobacco free. I think you can also use the list at the Tobacco Free Pledge and start looking at the products that those signatories offer. At Green Century, we avoid tobacco, fossil fuels, and other environmentally reckless industries as a way to match it up with people's moral or ethical values. We also invest in companies that use ESG for best in class. One of the other things I just want to note about Green Century is that we also lead a shareholder advocacy program that helps move companies to do better things on the environment. And one of the unique things about Green Century is that we're actually owned by nonprofits called the Public Interest Research Groups. And the PIRGs have been working on a campaign to stop vaping and other kinds of tobacco-related problems. And our profits from Green Century support those efforts and the efforts of all the PIRGs. On to step 3. That's where you have to just move your money. So you can do it all at once, or you can do it in stages. You can start a new IRA. You can roll over your IRA. If you use Fidelity or Schwab or other platforms, you can move from your current mutual fund to another mutual fund, Green Century, or another fund that you find that you want to invest in. If you want to make an IRA contribution for the year, you can do so directly with many of the mutual funds. And most of the mutual fund providers like Green Century provide a rollover form, which you fill out and submit, and we'll just roll it over. That's if you're doing it yourself. If you have a financial advisor, you can direct him or her to find tobacco-free investments for you. And one of the things I want to note is that if your financial advisor is not one that specializes in responsible investing and hasn't had this request before, they may put up some resistance. They may say that the performance will lag, or do you really want to do that? Or maybe you should just contribute to pay for another group. And I would just encourage you to be persistent. They work for you, and they just mostly just don't know what to do and are probably a little embarrassed, or they're just being maybe a little lazy about it all. So just be firm in your ask and share the resources that we'll have for you today so that you can move to a tobacco-free portfolio, again, slowly, or you could do it all at once. And so my last kind of tip is just, investigate, identify, and then move.
That's great. That's really good. And great that you have that rollover form, because I think sometimes when people know that they need to transfer their 401k, it's a little daunting, but it sounds like it's not.
Right.
Sounds like it's an easier process than you actually think it is. So that's really good to know.
Yep. You can just download. Oh, sorry. You can just download it from our website or email or call us. And we deal with a lot of individual investors and are happy to sort of hold your hand through the process of doing it.
That's great. So Rebecca, we talked, Leslie mentioned mutual funds, and I think we talked about target date funds. So just to kind of pull on that string, and ask you how you can best look into the underlying portfolio to determine the exposure in tobacco.
Yeah, no, this is a good question. And, most people don't have a heck of a lot of time when it comes to selecting their 401k options, 403b options, and just don't have the expertise. I mean, if you're a teacher, that you're not a financial advisor, right? So oftentimes folks will use target date funds, which have become a sort of increasing popularity over the past few years because they offer sort of a simple way to manage investment time horizons and risks. However, they're also low cost. They tend to be low cost. However, the way in which they accomplish that is typically by using index funds, which track an index. And many, not all, will track sort of a large cap index. And it's very, very likely, and I know for a fact, that Philip Morris and Altria are in the S&P 500, right? So if something is using the S&P 500 as their model, it's going to have an allocation to big tobacco. And as an example, Philip Morris is number 57 in the S&P 500 in terms of weighting, and Altria is number 85. So of the 500 stocks, they're in the top 100, right? Again, for these sort of broad indices, there very likely will be exposure, even internationally, because we've got, Japan Tobacco as an example. So how do you figure that out? Well, figure out if it's tracking an index, and then you can look up the holdings of the index. It's a Google search, S&P 500 holdings. You can see which stocks are in there. And again, engaging with your plan provider. And on the tobacco-free portfolios.org website, if you scroll all the way to the bottom, we do have a template letter which you can use in terms of engaging your plan provider. And to Leslie's point earlier, if you have a pension, a public pension, that information is in the public domain, and you can look for that and ask your administrator there as well. But unfortunately, there's a lot of passive investing that does have allocations to big tobacco. So looking under the hood is worthwhile, and it does tend to be a cheaper option that many people have embraced for those cost benefits. But if you're diligent about not financing big tobacco, it's worth taking a closer look.
Well, thank you. I know I learned a lot today. I hope everyone else did too. And we all have some homework to do if we want to achieve the goal of having a tobacco-free investment portfolio. And I would like to thank Rebecca and Leslie for all the tools and resources that we will now have. And as Leslie articulated, we will post those, so they will be available to everyone. So thank you both very much. And now I will turn to our live audience for a Q&A for the remainder of this session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so we're going to join, we're going to invite our two panelists back. There we go. Hi. How are you, Leslie? Hi, Rebecca.
I'm doing really well. Thank you.
Good. That was so great. You know, I am not a financial whiz at all, but it really gave me the motivation to really to look into the financing. So I did have a couple of questions. There are a couple of questions coming in, but you know, there's one thing, and I think we've spoken about it before, and I just kind of want to get it out of the way. And it seems ludicrous, but maybe it's kind of the old way of looking at things. But some people feel, you know, some organizations feel that if they hold tobacco stock, then they have a seat at the table, that they can actually, you know, go to the shareholder meetings and voice objections to certain policies that these tobacco companies are running. And it sounds ludicrous, but we've spoken with amazing altruistic companies or organizations who feel this way. What I know Rebecca and I have spoken about this before, but what do you have to say about that? And how did that even become a thing?
So
We could both answer. You go first, Rebecca.
But so with regards to tobacco explicitly, you know, Leslie's organization does a tremendous job of engaging in other areas of the market. When it comes to big tobacco, there's a track record there. So, you know, saying they're going to do something and what they actually do oftentimes has been sort of 180. In addition to that, there is a UN Global Convention that over 180 countries have signed that explicitly recommends zero engagement with big tobacco, right? So when it comes specifically to tobacco, our view and the view of the UN Global Treaty is that engagement doesn't work with tobacco. But I'd love Leslie to chime in as well.
Sure. At Green Century, we do work with hundreds of companies and change their environmental policies and practices. So engagement can work with certain industries. Having said that, tobacco is not one of those industries. Neither is fossil fuels, neither is nuclear weapons, because the problem is you're not trying to just change a policy or something in their supply chain. You're trying to change their core business. And this kind of advocacy, you don't change their core business. It's like trying to get Starbucks to stop selling coffee. They might they might get rid of the straws, which they have. They might sell more juice. They may have better employee relations. They are never going to stop selling coffee, the way the tobacco companies are never going to stop putting out tobacco products. So I like to think about it as like, that's just an excuse for investors who don't want to get rid of tobacco for whatever reason. They might be managing the pension plans of tobacco companies, for all you know, or they may just not care that much about the issue, or they don't want to be take any stand on any kind of issue at all. So you do have a seat at the table. You're at the children's table in the next room with the door closed. So
That's
what I would say.
Great analogy. It makes me think of Thanksgiving dinner, you know, with the kids in the kitchen and you're in the, yeah. So that's a great analogy. We have a question that came in that said, are you aware of state and or local government pensions investing in tobacco?
I'll take that one. So unfortunately, you know, I'm the first person with boots on the ground here in the US engaging with pension funds and the allocators here in the States. With the exception of CalPERS and CalSTRS in California, there's very little, if any, explicit exclusions there. So in terms of other pension funds at the state and local level, you know, at tobacco-free portfolios, we are engaging with those pension funds because there's a tremendous amount of capital, obviously, there. And if you move that away from big tobacco, there's the potential for tobacco becoming a stranded asset and increasing their cost of capital, right? So in terms of, are we aware of them? I would say unless it is explicitly said that they are not investing in tobacco like CalPERS and CalSTRS, the likelihood that they're investing is quite high. And I would also, just direct you again to the information that it is in the public domain. So
Right.
you can look that up with a Google search.
Can I ask a question again? As I said, I don't have a financial background. What is a stranded asset?
One that nobody wants to buy. So you don't want to be the last one to leave the party, right? So you don't want to be the last one holding the bag.
It's right. It's something that on a company's like balance sheet, it's a positive attribute now. But if they have to write off, say, their vaping industry because PAVE and others are so successful, that then that becomes a liability. It moves to the other side, and then it's a negative for the company.
Right.
So
if you're in
Yeah.
lose value.
right. So if you're in a state and a city and you want to know if you're if the state is investing in that, you can look it up. And then what do you do if you find out? I mean, who do you reach out to and what is there to do?
Yeah, so I would say, again, I would direct the listeners to the draft letter that we have on our website, tobaccofreeportfolios.org. I think we've also circulated it here in the chat room. But you have to engage with the pension administrators and say, hey, like, what are you doing here? Why is this in the pension? So that's really step one. And it's getting engaged also in sort of the policy level when it comes to those state and local pensions. They do have investment boards there, but it's also, engaging with politicians to make sure that they understand that the folks that they're representing in terms of pensions are not interested in financing the tobacco industry. I just wanted to say one more quick thing with regards to stranded assets. We saw, Altria is the manufacturer of Marlboros here in the States, and they very notoriously now purchased over a 30% position in Juul, which we know is a vaping company. And at the time of their purchase, it was valued, at a tremendously high valuation. To date, Altria has written down 90% of the purchase price of their investment in Juul. So that's, again, speaking to this potential stranded asset situation.
Right. So there are a couple of really good questions which came in, and again, about the pensions, I think one thing that's essential is that we have to make sure that teacher pension funds are not invested in tobacco or Juul or Altria or any vaping companies, because these products are ruining kids' lives and they're making it so difficult for teachers to teach. So I think that's something that we really have to highlight, that would just be, mind blowing if teachers' investment if pensions invested in that. But so the person who asked the first question is following up and is asking if CalPERS stopped investing in tobacco as part of an anti-tobacco push in California, or is that just they've always?
No, they've been in and out of tobacco, but they've been tobacco free now for a number of years. And if you go to our website as well, it does show the financial benefit that they received from when they divested, the second time from tobacco.
Right. And so again, about pension funds, someone is saying, one of the topics for pension funds is risk. And how do investment firms look at tobacco companies with that lens?
I think that they look at all companies in terms of reputational, regulatory, competitive risk. The risk, the more that campaigning is there, the bigger the risk it is to them. But I think it's important, and I assume it's in sort of all talking points about any one industry. If you divest from any one industry, whether it's tobacco or fossil fuels or any one you pick, that over the long term, there's no really measurable impact, and there's studies backing that up. And so that's more in terms of performance, but I think as the health benefits of tobacco become more and more relevant, there is a greater risk to those industries. That's why you see them diversifying and trying to get into other kinds of products, because they may see that their days are numbered in some ways. So it does take some, I think, sophisticated, eventually, you need someone who can argue the financial piece with the pension fund and their investment committee, because that will be, whether they want to or not, that will be where they kind of say, well, you don't really understand this. And it's not that hard to understand. It might not be your expertise, but there are others like Rebecca and myself and other people in the field that can certainly assist with this. We've done a lot of work on fossil fuel divestment. So we've been working with pension funds all over the country on that, preparing testimony, giving them studies, things like that. And I don't know if Rebecca, if Tobacco Free Purpose is set up to do that, or there's others that can help with that, but that's a natural part of the process, but don't let that be daunting. So it's like most pension funds, as are most investments, they're in tobacco, which is like a standard thing. It's shocking, but it's standard. But there's no reason that they can't move out of it.
Right,
Yeah,
Rebecca?
I mean, I'll just touch on it. Tobacco-free portfolios work is really truly making the tobacco-free conversation part of mainstream finance. And when we're, again, talking about passive, these sort of index tracking investments that have allocations to big tobacco, our intention is to make it sort of the norm, sort of the mainstream option for pension funds and 401ks to have this exclusion. And to your point, Dorian, on risk, and Leslie touched on this too, when we're talking about reputational risk, we're talking about supply chain risk. There's child labor throughout the tobacco supply chain, litigation risk. As an example, British American Tobacco has nearly 3,000 open litigation cases against it. And these are things that stock analysts and pension providers need to really think about is, over the long term. And when we're talking about pensions and 401ks, these are long-term investments. Do you really want to be putting your money or your client's money in an industry that has these sort of long-term documented challenges? And in terms of risk, it's really hard to argue that you're prudently managing money when you're exposing your clients to that kind of risk.
Right. And I think it's to mention, Juul, Altria, Philip Morris, Altria, Juul, there are over 600 lawsuits by school districts against Juul. Then you have the AG, the attorneys general, the state lawsuits, and then you have personal injury lawsuits. So, it's just representative of really where this industry is going. Sorry, Leslie, you were going to say.
I was going to say two things. You could see where there's different pieces of a state working at counter purposes. So you can see school districts suing tobacco companies, and then their pension funds unknowingly, or just because it's like business as usual, investing in those tobacco companies. And so that's the sort of moral argument and health argument, I think, is very easy to make for everyone, given all the anti-tobacco education that's happening at school levels and around the country. And also note that there's a whole set of long-time responsible funds. Green Century is just one of them that have never invested in tobacco. So this is not a new concept.
Right.
It's just one that is now expanding out with the help of tobacco-free portfolios. It's not new. It's been done. We've been around for 30 years. And so this was an early exclusion for most of us for health and environmental reasons back in the day. So there's also track records on those kinds of funds that you could always cite. Real track records, as well as the studies that are available.
Yeah, no, I think it's important to mention that, a lot of these, they're side by side, they're parallel. Like the teachers, are combating vaping on the ground. You know, we've heard from all of our panelists today in all of the different sessions about how, what a struggle it is. And then you have their 401ks or their pensions, or, you know, investing in the fund. So I think it's important to say, you know, you have a voice in not only in your personal investments, obviously in your personal investments, but if you're a teacher and you find out that your school district is investing, you can, you know, send the letter. You can mobilize all the teachers in your community to send letters. And, you know, it's your money and it's the taxpayers' money, and they have a voice too. So I think I love that there's a letter on the Tobacco Free Portfolio website that you can download and use. But yeah, I mean, just, you know, parents and teachers and educators, and, you know, we all have to do what's right. And it's very important, I think, to take a stand and take, you know, use your voice.
Mhm.
I mean, they have to listen at some point when there are people, you know, who
Yeah.
are yelling about this.
Yep. And I think it just requires a little miniature campaign. You have to figure out like who really are the people making the decision at the investment committee level. And they tend to be like a smaller group of people who may have some antiquated notions about excluding an industry. And so you just have to combat them with basic knowledge, and then do the old grassroots thing with the letters and more people
Right. Controllers. I mean,
showing up.
the state controllers, the city controllers, you know, they're that's part of their purview, is to oversee that. So, you know,
Right.
start at the top really and kind of move your way down.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And to Leslie's point, why are we financing big tobacco and then, you know, they externalize the costs on the state. The state's taking care of the healthcare costs from the tobacco-related illnesses. Why are, you know, in order to sort of bring an end to this situation, we got to stop financing it while we also, you know, deal with it in policy and on a personal level, right?
Yeah.
Right. And I love what you said earlier about the political clout, that these industries have such political clout because people are pouring money into them. Well, if you cut off that funding, they don't have as much political clout anymore. And it's another way to protect our kids.
And having a public divestment campaign also raises the visibility and the pressure on those companies. So I like to think about it as like, you know, it's like chipping away at their power, like chinks in their armor. And the more little chinks you make, the weaker their protections and clout gets.
Right.
And so this is another way, you know, 50 hammers from 50 different states, or at the local level too, and individuals too. So if everyone on here is a teacher, everyone's listening is a teacher, it's like your spouse or your friends or your parents, like they probably don't know either that they're unknowingly investing in tobacco. Most people don't honestly have the interest or time to look at what's in their mutual fund. But again, if you haven't picked a socially responsible one, it's just, that's what it's in there.
I think most people don't even think about it almost.
Right.
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 Like, oh yeah. And then again, you have, you know, you mentioned, Rebecca, that some of these names are not as recognizable as they used to be. So
Yes.
they're changing their names, like Facebook changed their name. I mean, they're all changing their names.
Well, Altria did too, right?
Like going
They're
under.
tricky.
So they're tricky. So if these names are changed, or you also have all these other tobacco products that are going after our kids, and some are privately held, you know, some are public, like how do you know, you know, I guess one of you said there was a list on one of the
Here's
websites.
right. Well, the Tobacco Free Funds tool, you type in the name of your mutual fund that you have, and it looks it up for you. And it looks up principally, are there any tobacco holdings? They have an extra part that is like, do you hold any entertainment industries that promote tobacco use? That's sort of a secondary, like bonus point thing, is the way I think about it. The first thing you want to look at is just core, does it hold tobacco companies? And it will just say 0% or 5% or 2% or whatever it is.
Right. Right. But I love what you said about how the core and then the secondary. I mean, something that we've been yelling about is the non-nicotine vapes, which don't have, they're not classically tobacco, but a lot of the tobacco companies are becoming interested because it kind of normalizes the behavior. And a company like Urban Outfitters is selling them over the counter to kids. Now, Urban Outfitters is a public company. So if you know that, then you can go and, make sure you're not investing in Urban Outfitters. There are so many different companies. Netflix, has been one of the largest streaming services that has the most tobacco imagery of all of the streaming services. So, there are alternate ways. Once you do divest yourself from tobacco stock, then you can go after the other ones who are promoting tobacco in different ways.
Yep.
But that's right. And then to our point earlier about engagement versus exclusion, when it comes to Netflix and the other companies you mentioned, you can engage with them and say, get rid of this. Get rid of this. It's not their primary line of business, right? You can make a difference. Whereas with tobacco, you just have to get rid of it. And so again, I think it's the conversation about like risk return and does it hurt and I mean, you do have to put a little elbow grease into the research here, but the conversation about, does it hurt performance? That really is an epically dinosauric view at this point. And there's plenty of research to point to that it not only doesn't hurt, but can also potentially benefit, right? So, I mean, there's business cycles and but when we're talking about just, this sort of standard statement, we can sort of put that on the shelf and talk about the future. And that's what we're doing when we're talking about long-term investments anyhow, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. Leslie?
Right. No, I was just saying, I've been involved in the fossil fuel divestment campaign for 10 years now, and it's exactly the same sort of path forward in that all these arguments come up: engagement, what if we owned a small part, we'll lose money, this, that, and it's just all the same. They're all just excuses for people who don't want to either take the time or who don't have our same observations about the tobacco industry. And so you just need to be, keep going and be diligent. All of them can be answered.
Right.
Period. They all can be answered. It all can be done. And it's been done, on multiple other issues before. It is surprising to me that tobacco, given for how long we've known that this is a problem, is the campaign we have to wage today still, but it is the campaign that we're waging. So it's going to be, I really feel like this group and other groups and through tobacco-free portfolios, it is a new era on this, and the landscape is going to change, and we're going to look back in just a couple of years and go, look at how much money has been moved. Look at all the articles, look at the pressure, look at what the companies are doing. They're running scared, and more is going to build up, and it all will have started around this year.
Great. Well, I think that's
with all of you and everyone who listens and passes this on to their friends and their fellow teachers and things like that.
Exactly. Pass it on, everyone. I think that's a great place to end. I do want to say we will have all of the links that we talked about on our website, where you can access the recording, probably starting tomorrow. And, as you said, there are so many amazing resources on the website. So thank you for taking the time. This is something that I know I didn't really think about before I met Rebecca. So I think it's a great, it's something that we really have to think about, and it's something we need to spread the word about. So thank you for coming and for joining.
Thank you.